Jacob Gibson here talking about spiritual formation. I think spiritual formation is absolutely necessary. We see that in the Great Commission that Jesus gave in Matthew 28. He said, "Go to all nations, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you." And I think that's really the key of spiritual formation is obedience. That there is an end goal. It's not kind of a random journey, a discovery of spirituality, like a lot of modern spirituality and modern culture would have us believe what spiritual formation is. It's not this directionless journey. There's definitely a destination in mind, and that is obedience to Jesus. We want to become more like Christ. We want to draw near to God and focus less on ourselves. I like what Willard says in the beginning of his article. He says that everyone receives a spiritual formation just like they receive an education. But it could be a good one and it could be a bad one. I think that's really when the role of the church begins to kick in. That we want to give as many people an opportunity to receive a good spiritual formation. I think God gives the grace to spiritually form people. And really, according to Thomas C. Oden, his book, The Transforming Power of Grace, it's really futile to forget about God when trying to spiritually form people. We can't try to spiritually form people if we forget the source of the one who does the forming. And so we have to remember that God is always the giver of grace. God is the one that spiritually forms. He's the one that makes it happen within us. I like what Keith Drury talks about in his book, Spiritual Disciplines for Ordinary People, where a Christian or a new believer, they've been changed by God. They have the saving grace, but they haven't been changed enough. And so God has to come in and change us even more. And Christians undergo this process of change. And it all begins with God giving us that grace. As far as how that happens, I really like what John Wesley has to say. And there's a wonderful book, Recapturing the Wesley's Vision. It talks about means of grace. And just because grace is not earned doesn't mean that we can't go after and pursuing even more grace. And so these means of grace, prayer and fasting and worship and reading the word, fellowship, baptism, communion, all these different means of grace put us in a position to receive more grace from God. And so I think that's really the way that we can pursue spiritual formation. It's a way that we can encourage others to pursue spiritual formation is pursue God's grace. Pursue the one that can change us. And the way to do that is through the means of grace.